Hello everyone, I'm George Myland, and the house behind me was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's house for the latter part of his life. So Conan Doyle is best known for having been the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh in 1859. He was of Irish extraction. I don't know if it's his parents, perhaps his grandparents had moved from Ireland to Great Britain, and they were middle class. They lived at the top of Leith Walk. I don't know what they did for a living. There's quite a lot of anti-Catholicism around at the time. They lived right beside the Catholic Cathedral. He attended Stonyhurst College in Lancashire, and from there he went to Edinburgh University, where he read medicine, and he practiced in Scotland and latterly in England. So he's married, he had 5 children. He was a conservative in politics. Catholics in Great Britain often tended towards the Liberal Party at the time, feeling that the Church of England was the Tory party at prayer, as Disraeli had said. It was never quite true, but he wasn't like that. He was a Tory himself. He drifted away from Catholicism and did Christianity full stop. Became a spiritualist by the end of his life, and he's not buried in Christian consecrated ground. Anyway, so then he began writing these detective stories about Sherlock Holmes. This character and his background is obscure. This man from God knows where. We don't know where he was born, or was he a police detective? We were left guessing. He set himself up as a consultant detective at 221B Baker Street, an address which then didn't exist. There is Baker Street, and it's only about a mile and a half from where we're standing. But subsequently, the Baker Street was extended. The adjoining street was made part of Baker Street. So all of a sudden that address existed. It happened to be owned by a bank. And the bank, well, they laughed all the way to the bank when they sold that address to the Sherlock Holmes Museum. So Sherlock Holmes, he will often solve a case without leaving a room saying the case is afoot, just by his vast powers of logical reasoning. He would just deduce what people did. And there's all sorts of intrigue, and there are all sorts of scams like the Red-Haired League, or foreign politicians who are here assassinating each other. And Sherlock Holmes, he sometimes goes incognito, in disguise. He carries revolvers with him. There was no Firearms Act at the time. He plays the violin to unwind, and he likes to inject himself with is it morphine or heroin, certainly some hard drug, which was entirely illegal at the time until the 1920s. He's good friends with Dr. Watson. They both appear to be confirmed bachelors. Watson, who practiced at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, that's a real place. It's elementary, my dear Watson. I don't think that actually appears in any of the novels. He used some Latin phrases there, like he turned over in his mind, which is exactly the way they say it in Latin, but he put it into English. Nobody writes that anymore. So these series were incredibly popular. His nemesis is Moriarty, Professor Moriarty, and they struggle to death in the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland, a real place, fall to their deaths there. So the last one was published shortly before the First World War, but they were wildly popular. So he's knighted by King George V for services to literature. He was against Home Rule for Ireland, and most Irish Catholics, even born in this country, were in favour of it. So he became fascinated with the occult and spiritualism, going to seances. Was it possible to contact people from the other side? Despite his scientific education, he was rather irrational on this one. And indeed, there's this Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Edinburgh, which is about this kind of thing. I made a video in it, and they hold seances to this day. What else about him? He was a stalwart of the First World War, believed the war should be fought to the finish. But so many youths were killed in the war that there were many people after the war who desperately wanted to believe it was true. He split with some people who thought the whole thing was a scam. He had met Houdini, but was offended by Houdini's attempt to debunk these people, saying that these so-called spiritualists, that they're just swindlers. They're just preying on the grief and angst of vulnerable people who are grieving for their dead relatives. You're scamming often poor people with these false messages when you can't communicate with the other side at all. So that was too much for Arthur Doyle to take. He died in 1930. He did publish other novels besides Sherlock Holmes. The other thing about Sherlock Holmes is there's no mention of the deerstalker pipe, or indeed a deerstalker cap, or indeed what's that curious pipe, the billhook pipe, because it was Basil Rathbone, this American actor who in the 1920s in films, he made that sine qua non of the part. This big pipe allowed him to speak with it in his mouth and I'm not sure why the deerstalker hat. It was certainly instantly recognisable. The Inverness cape. These accoutrements were later additions by Basil Rathbone, but recently there's been a version of Sherlock Holmes starring Benedict Cumberbatch. I thought was dreadful, actually, but he decided he would dispense with these later additions to the Sherlock Holmes character. Anyway, that's a little bit about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I'll leave it there. Toodaloo.